Right. So my name is Bianca Gomez. I'm one of the youth justice directors at Freedom Inc. And my role in the organization has a lot to do with youth justice and specifically decriminalization and protecting young people from violence, including state violence, including violence in the home, including violence from police and schools and in the community. So that's my area of expertise. I wear a lot of different hats in the organization as well. I do domestic violence and sexual assault services, mainly for Black women, girls, and LGBTQ youth and children. And I have a whole host of political education programs that I lead for young people. A lot of those happen after school, and some of them are more year-round programs that happen for young people because it's so important that they have an analysis around the world that they're living in and a Black feminist analysis from my perspective. So we're going to be talking a little bit about police free schools. I'm going to try to make it as interactive as possible, but we've been struggling with this obviously since we're on Zoom. So I'll ask people to contribute in the chat, or I'll call on a few people to to share some of their experiences. Again, I can't see you, so just feel free to take yourself off mute when if you want to talk and contribute. Okay. So Freedom Inc. I'm not sure how many of you have heard about Freedom Inc. or what you heard, but Freedom Inc. is a nonprofit organization in Madison where Black, Hmong, and Cambodian elders, women, youth, queer, and trans survivors who are creating a world that we want to live in. So our mission is to end violence. And again, we see that violence as a whole host of things, right? Not just interpersonal violence and domestic violence, but also police violence, also housing, also food, also all of the things that make it impossible for our communities to live whole and healthy lives. So our values are gender justice, queer justice, Black and Southeast Asian liberation, anti-colonialism, and abolition. So we are an abolitionist organization. We do not believe that police and prisons are going to solve social problems or quote unquote crime, which the majority of crime is actually social problems that could be solved with resources as opposed to putting people, especially young people, in cages. Okay, so to start, let's have some story time because I think we have enough time in this presentation. I got in trouble when. So tell us about a time that you got in trouble in school. And what happened when you got in trouble. And how rate on the scale from 1 to 5 the quality of the response from the adults around you. And what how should they have responded is a better question. Do we have any volunteers?
I'll volunteer. This is Susan. I remember in middle school, I went to a small Catholic school, and there it it was girls and boys, and we were kind of taunting each other. And the thing and we were running around, and the nuns, one of the nuns pulled myself and another girl, and we got in trouble, and none of the boys got in trouble. And so I remembered that I felt that the response should have been more equitable across all the kids involved, not just the ones she didn't like.
Mm-hmm.
I can share one as well. I'm Synovia. I'm not sharing my screen right now, or rather my face. But I remember I also went to a private school or a Catholic school in elementary. And there was this one day I was swinging my purse, kind of like Taekwondo style, but not at anyone in particular. It just had a really long string. And I just remember being very intrigued by the whole situation. And then when I came inside from recess, I got pulled aside because I guess like someone was scared and thought I was swinging it at them. And basically, just because that other person was afraid, I got in big trouble and like wasn't allowed to come to recess for a week. And it was a really big deal over something that I wasn't even aware of. It was really out of my hands, and I couldn't see like the bias or the criminalization of what I was doing at the time. Like, there was no way I was digesting it in that way. But looking back on it, that's definitely what I think it was.
Hmm. Thank you for sharing, Fnovia.
Um, this is Howard Hayes from the Community Center. And before I moved here, I originally grew up in Georgia. And so one of the main times I think about when I got in trouble was a time where we were playing a game and I got someone out and they called me the N-word. And so um, in response, I punched them. I got suspended, and the other kid I got suspended for 3 days, and the other kid got in school suspension for 3 days. And I distinctly remember my mother negotiating with the principal about why did this one kid get in school suspension and still got the opportunity to continue going to school when I had to get kicked out of school. And it was actually really empowering to see my mother stand up for what, I mean, because she grew up in Alabama. So she felt a need to stand up for the right because the school's position on it is he used words and I used physical violence. So therefore, those are two completely different things. And to see my mother step in, stand up to the principal and have them maybe rethink how they go about using their policies because, as you know, in the South, that word is specifically in the area where I was in, was thrown around a lot, and it kind of um, handcuffed a lot of the Black youth because white kids knew that they could use that word. And the only thing that we could really do as Black youth is either take it or try to come up with something that we could respond to. And it never felt the same as like what they were saying to us.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I had a similar story when I was in the fifth grade. A little girl called me the N word, and I don't condone. I tell all the youth, I do please do not get in a fight in school. Do not, keep your hands to yourself. But I don't regret my decision to slap her even 25 years later. So it's all good. So the next activity we're gonna do, I'm gonna actually come back to stop sharing my screen for a second so I can see everyone. So everyone, we're going to type in the chat at the exact same time. So get your answer ready in the chat, but don't press enter until I say press enter. So the question is, I feel safe when? So think about a time when you feel safe. It could be literally anything that makes you feel safe. And get your answer ready in the chat. I'll give you all about 30 seconds, and then we'll all press enter on the count of three when I say press enter. Okay. I'm not sure if that was 30 seconds or not, but does anyone need any more time? Okay. 1, 2, 3. Okay. I'm looking at the responses. A lot of people feel safe when they feel supported, when they can truly be themselves and be unapologetic, when they're with their people, when they're with their family, when they're with um, their friends, when they're at home. I see a lot of trust popping up. Community, all of those buzzwords that we often hear when we talk about safety. I do this activity because whenever literally it never fails, whenever I do this activity, no one ever says police make them feel safe. That's not the first thing that comes to mind when we think about safety, actually, right? It's the people who we love and who we trust, who we can depend on, who we have a relationship with that make us feel the safest. Um, and when we think about responses to harm, that those are actually the responses to harm that can mitigate harm in a way without causing more harm. Because if my grandma is here, trust me, I'm gonna be acting a lot different, right? Because I love, trust her, and respect her. And you know, if I'm acting the fool as I used to do when I was a teenager, her her intervening in my acting the fool is coming from a loving, trusting, helpful guidance, you know, place, as opposed to the police who are there, whose job it is to criminalize me and my family. And that's how a lot of our young people see all of you, right? When they talk about their teachers, when they talk about after school workers, when they talk about, you know, people in the community, um, they see you as having that loving guidance role, as opposed to a criminalizing, harmful, badge and a gun role that is scary, right? And we're in a different political time, so I don't think I have to do so much more explaining about why the police do not make young people feel safe, especially Black young people. You know, my uncle, he's my aunt's husband. I don't know. He's a police officer. And he even says the police don't make him feel safe. I'm like, you a whole cop with a gun and a badge, and the police don't make you feel safe, right? So how do you think that impacts, you know, Black young people in Chicago where you work, right? If you don't even feel safe with your colleagues, how do you think that they feel with your colleagues? And he's actually a school resource. Real, real interesting. Let me go back to sharing my screen. Okay. So we're gonna play another game. In this game, you'll see a photo of a kid getting in trouble by school resource officers specifically. And you'll guess what happened, guess what they did wrong, quote unquote, to deserve, again, quote unquote, that reaction from police officers. And again, just take yourself off mute and guess. I will also say that some of these pictures are really disturbing to see. I draw the line at videos. Like I refuse to watch any videos of Black people being harmed or being killed. But I did include the photos so that you could, you know, have some visual of what happened. And if it's too much for you, it's okay if you don't participate in this activity. Or let me back up. If you are a person of color and this is too much for you, it's okay if you don't participate, or um, you know, just turn off your screen and just listen for a little bit. Okay, so again, take yourself off mute. I would like to move through this rather quickly, so if people would be who are willing and able can just quickly volunteer. And it's okay if you have the wrong answer, it's kind of the point. So guess what happened in this incident? What did the student do?
He refused to get up.
Refused to get up? Okay. Once I have 2 or 3 responses, I'll move on to give you the correct answer.
Say he was being insubordinate, which is probably related to refusing to get up.
Okay.
Someone in the chat said they talked back to the cop.
Okay. So this happened in Columbia, South Carolina, actually where my nieces go to school. This student would not put away her cell phone. She was actually talking to her mom. The student was actually struggling with homelessness and housing insecurity at the time, and her mom were communicating about where she was going to go after school. The teacher got really upset because, you know, there was a lot of tension. She was talking back. So she called the school resource officer on her. This cop literally threw her across the room. This is only the initial interaction when he first walked in. He literally threw her across the room. And this incident in Columbia, South Carolina is actually what started the National Police Free Schools campaign. So when we write about police free schools and whatever history books we write it in, this will be kind of like the Montgomery bus boycott or the Rosa Parks of the police free schools movement in the United States. And interestingly enough, this officer actually, he and his partner also had sexual assault allegations from Black girls in the school as well. And that's important to mention because the second largest, you know, we think about complaints against police departments as police brutality and excessive force. But the second largest complaint against police in the United States is sexual misconduct. And the average age is I think 15 years old, right? So if that's the average, then younger, older youth, it's a real problem that a lot of us don't talk about because we often ignore Black girls' experiences when it comes to police violence and focus on the brutality. But sexual violence is a huge issue that literally gets swept under the rug by the police and also in our own communities a lot of the times. All right, guess what happened in this photo?
He got into a fight.
Okay.
Told the officer to leave him alone.
Okay. So this student was trying to use the bathroom. This happened in Ben Franklin in Philadelphia, I believe. So this school, you had to have, you couldn't just go to the bathroom at Ben Franklin. You had to have a special pass anytime you wanted to use the bathroom, and you had to have either a teacher or a security guard or a police officer unlock the bathroom for you. Even though I would argue that using the bathroom is kind of like a human right because everybody has to go to the bathroom, but whatever. This student had a disability, and it was widely known in the school that he could go to the bathroom whenever he needed to because he could not hold himself for long enough. So he was, you know, the only student in the school that was allowed to go to the bathroom whenever he needed to. And the cop did not believe him. And he's arguing with him to like, I need to get in the bathroom. I need to get in the bathroom. And the cop was just like, you're not listening. You're being disrespectful. And they ended up tackling him to the ground. And he ended up using the bathroom on himself, which is more humiliating, than anything. I'll just move through the rest of these quickly for the sake of time. This happened in Texas. at Round Rock High School. This student got in a fight in a lunchroom, and the fight was literally over. And I'm pretty sure it was a food fight, if I'm not mistaken. I might be mixing that up with a different incident. But he got in a fight in the lunchroom. The fight was actually over when the police came, and this is the police officer's response to this Black teenager. And I put this one in here to really clarify that I'm in no way arguing that kids don't do wild shit. I did wild stuff when I was a teenager. Like, I got in so many fights. I got in like a lot of trouble, but in no way would I have deserved this, right? In no way does a young person do choked, even when they make a mistake, even when they do some off the wall stuff, even when they getting on your nerves, right? Or even when they're being quote unquote violent, right? Violence from police officers does not stop harm from, young people. It only worsens the trauma that they're already dealing with as Black young people in this society. And then I'm not sure how many of you have heard about the Free Grace movement, but this happened at the height of the pandemic, or at the beginning of the pandemic, actually. Grace was a 16-year-old teenager in Michigan. She was on, I think, probation at the time, and she didn't do her homework. So they sent her to jail. And this is this is like March, April last year, when none of us knew what was going on, right? They use that as an excuse to criminalize her and send her to jail, when the students that I work with that have a 4.0 weren't doing their homework. She was also struggling because of COVID and trying to manage doing online school. And the judge said, "Oh, you haven't been going to school, you haven't been doing your work, jail." So we had to literally have a whole movement to get her out of jail and get her back in school. And I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this. This happened at Whitehorse Middle School. And I put this in there because we know that the police are only part of the problem. We can't blame it all on the police. It's a larger system and a larger ideology around anti-Blackness, and which kids we need to control, keep in line, and essentially make behave like white students. And that's not what we want. We want to create a world where our kids get to be themselves, get to be loud and proud, get to explore, experiment, get to be academically fulfilled, and get to be invested in, for lack of better words, right? And we know, again, that the police are only part of the problem. The kids, most of our young people have more interactions with racist and anti-Black educators than they do with racist and anti-Black police. And then, a lot of us think that it's only teenagers who are, like being assaulted by police officers or having interactions with police officers. But these are all young people under the age of 10. And these are all incidents that have happened in the last few years. So these are 5 to 10-year-olds handcuffed for throwing tantrums. This is how we think we need to respond to Black literal children when they're throwing tantrums. Also, when we talk about the intersections of disability justice, the majority of 5 out of 6 of the youth that are shown here actually have a disability. And instead of schools implementing their IEP, instead of schools using calm down resources, instead of schools using whatever resources that they have available, they just throw their hands up and call the police on babies, essentially. Okay, so when we talk about the criminalization of Black communities, like where does this ideology come from? What, like how can somebody possibly call the police officer on a 5-year-old? It makes no sense to me. But when we think about, I won't I won't spend time going all over all of these. If you have a specific question about one, I will definitely answer it. But when we talk about um, ideologies and our beliefs and our values that contribute to the criminalization of Black communities and Black children, these are some, recent things that contribute to that. So we can talk about the enslavement of Black people. We can talk about Reconstruction. We can talk about um, go back and have a deeper historical analysis. But I just wanted to bring up some things that happened in recent history in our lifetime, right? Because that disallows us to blame it on slavery and like, oh, I wasn't around back then, so that's not my problem. No, these are things, zero tolerance policies happened in our lifetime. The preschool to prison pipeline, where 3 and 5-year-olds are getting kicked out of preschool and eventually get incarcerated later on in life. Those things are happening in our lifetime. So I intentionally spend time talking about these as opposed to talking about the criminalization of Black people during and after enslavement. Does anybody have any questions about a particular topic?
Someone in the chat asked about broken windows theory.
Yeah. So broken windows theory is basically a theory that says any small crime, any small infraction, any small harm that is done you need to bring down the whole state on that person, because if you don't, later in life they're going to end up being a murderer, rapist, and we're not and uncontrollable. So if some kid is outside past curfew, snatch their ass up right then and there, so that later in life they don't become a criminal. Which actually, and I'm really oversimplifying that, but or if kids are playing baseball or basketball or whatever, and they end up breaking your window, they're criminals. Snatch them up right then and there, call the police, bring down the arm of the whole state on them, so that they don't end up being criminals later on in life. And I think most of us have sense to know it doesn't work like that, right? The earlier you criminalize youth, the more likely they are to be criminalized in the future, right? The less the more intervention and the more support and love and dignity, right? Which all sound fluffy but are really important, you give youth, the less likely they are to end up in the criminal justice system later on in life. Okay, I'm gonna move on to the next. Okay, so when it comes to police and schools specifically, what are some common justifications for having police in schools?
The one I hear all the time is school shootings.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So actually, I always tell this story because when I was a teacher and I worked in an all white high school, I was literally the only Black teacher, not in the school, the entire district. There were Blacks, and the school is about 15-16% Black. So I had Black students, but I was the only Black teacher. And it was, kind of in a racist part of Ohio. So I was so scared. I was like, if they get to shooting in this school, I'm the first person to go. So I really understand that fear. And I really understand that fear from parents, from students, from teachers, from other folks. And then I learned that school cops don't stop school shootings, right? A school resource officer has never stopped an active school shooting. Never, not one time in history. There were school resource officers in the school shooting that happened in Kentucky, in Texas and in Parkland, there were school resource officers on the campus, and they did not stop the school shooting, right? So when an active school shooting is taking place, a school resource officer actually has little to no ability to stop it. It actually makes more sense from a, I'm not saying that I support the military and all of that, but from a military standpoint, it actually makes sense to be outside of the place where the incident is taking place. So I know I oversimplify that for the sake of the session, but I can definitely send more resources for that. Freedom Inc. actually did a frequently asked question, and that was the top question that we got from everyone. What about school shootings? How do we stop people with weapons? And we partnered with some researchers at UW-Madison actually, and some other researchers around the country, and learned that they don't stop school shootings. So it's just an excuse to have them in there. But what they do, what school resource officers do actually do, is funnel millions of children into the school to prison pipeline, since the 90s. So when we talk about the history of police in schools, we think that police were put in schools after Columbine, which happened in, I think, 1999. It was one of the major school shootings in Denver. But police were actually put in schools during the civil rights movement and the Black Power movements to suppress Black and Brown student organizing. So, of course, we've seen all of the civil rights photos where police are attacking Black protesters, but one of the tactics that they also used was to literally put police officers in Black and Brown schools so that they could surveil and suppress their liberation movements. Also, police were put in schools during integration, right? Because little white parents did not want their little precious white children going to school with Black animals, essentially, right? So what did they do? They used the arm of the state, which is called the police, to protect their precious white kids from Black students. And again, I have more resources on this. There is a report that we participated in called the We Came to Learn report and toolkit, which talks a lot more about the history of police in schools and breaks down some myths around police in schools. I don't know why that cute photo is there, but it's there. So we painted police-free schools in front of the Doyle building actually last year around this time. And this is right before our big win. So our young people fought for, 5 years at this point for MMSD to end the contract with the Madison Police Department. And we're so happy for that win. We think it's the first step in our goal to liberation and abolition. But we know the police are only a part of the problem, and we know that just because there's no physical SRO does not mean the police won't be called, and that is what we are trying to prevent. We don't want police to have interactions with our young people. We want y'all to have interactions with our young people. So some of our demands, and again, Freedom Inc., we are an organizing organization. So we move in a very particular way that's centered around movement history, movement science, direct action, political education, and community organizing. So, a lot of folks don't always agree with the way that we do our work, but we study history, movement history in particular, and we're connected to a larger national movement and a larger national front, actually international now, because we've partnered with folks in the UK and folks in Toronto around police-free schools. So we have an international movement that we're pulling from, as opposed to just a local strategy, if that makes sense. So our demands: one, we want to keep cops out of school. We don't want police officers to have interactions with young people. As we just explained, they're harmful. We can list off a whole bunch of statistics. Also, we have so much recent history, data, videos, everything, right? We have of a lot of resources to pull from to show us why police interacting with young people is not safe, right? And why we also are fighting for an accountability process for school staff who use police to harm children. The so that's what we don't want, right? I know everybody always hears us say no cops in schools, police free schools, F12, whatever, keep the police away from our children. But what we actually want is to invest in the leadership, wellness, and creativity of Black youth and youth of color. So all of the complaints that we get from teachers, that we get from the schools, that we get from parents, that we get from community about young people and what they don't do, we always ask, how are you investing in young people? And I don't just mean financially. Of course, that's important because we got billions of dollars in this city, and how many of it go to Black youth who need it the most. But we actually want to invest in their leadership, wellness, and creativity. And we think it's important that the youth define what that means. So me, Bianca, the youth justice director, I don't get to say, hey, youth, this is what it means to invest in you. The young people have to tell me, this is what you can actually do for me. This is actually what it means. This is the leader that I want to be. This is what I'm going through mentally or physically. This is how I want to express myself. And then my job as an adult is to make it happen with whatever resources I can. The third thing is we want to use transformative justice instead of punishment. Punishment does not work. The school to prison pipeline does not work. If it did work, our young people will be on the straight and narrow, but it doesn't work. It only leads to more harm, more trauma, and more criminalization. Transformative justice is an opportunity for us to look at the root causes of why young people are doing what they're doing and look at the whole scenario. Because I will tell you, I'm at some school every week advocating for a young person. And even though a lot of the times they were wrong, like, hey, you shouldn't have talked back to your teacher like that. That was disrespectful. But the teacher was disrespectful too. And the young person is the only person that's being held accountable. The young person is the only one that's being sent to the restorative justice room or being suspended or being expelled, right? The adults in this scenario actually don't get held accountable for the harm that they cause to the young person. And I'll give you a quick example. One of our young people had a dress code violation, I guess. Like, she wore a very short skirt. I thought it was cute, but the teacher didn't. The teacher tugged on her skirt and told her it was too short. And the student swatted the teacher's hand away. The teacher felt so upset, so disrespected. She called the behavioral support staff. And that student ended up getting in trouble. And you don't have the right to put your hands on a student's body, right? That is not practicing consent. That is not practicing body safety. And a student has a right to protect her body. So I understand why I don't understand why the teacher was offended by her actions, but you don't have a right to put your hands on her body. So why is she being sent to restorative justice and you just sitting there teaching your class? That doesn't add up to me. That doesn't make sense to me, right? And then we also need to decolonize around gender and what's appropriate on Black girls' bodies. That's a whole nother conversation for another day. I'll come back a second time if you want me to. And then the fourth demand is to give most impacted youth, parents, and trusted adults real decision-making power over schools. We've been in this game in America for 400 years. Everybody keep telling us what to do, what we need to do for our community, what we need to do for our education, what we need to learn, what we need to be in life. And we honestly I'm just exhausted because it has not worked in our favor. We need self-determination, essentially, to say what our schools should look like. The most impacted people, the ones who are constantly being criminalized, I want to hear from the kid who has straight Fs, who doesn't go to class, who keeps getting in fights, and who just got out of the JRC. They should actually have decision-making power over the school if we actually want to make schools better. What does that child and their family think about what would make them feel safe, what would make them feel welcome, right? When we focus on the most impacted, we get it makes it better for everybody else. Does anybody have any questions about this? I feel so bad because I'm just literally talking at you. I can't see you. I don't know if you vibing with me. I don't know if you got questions. I don't know if you rolling your eyes. Okay. So when we talk about all the stuff that we don't want, it's important to talk about what we do want. I think it's easy to tell somebody, you getting on my nerves, but it's much more difficult to tell somebody how they can not get on your nerves, or how they can be in the space and be cordial or whatever. So when it comes to restorative justice, to simplify, we do it wrong. We don't do it right. And restorative justice has really been co-opted, appropriated, and colonized, essentially. We have an inside joke that they're gentrifying restorative justice, because it's being used as another form of punishment instead of what it's really intended to be. And I think it's really important that we understand restorative justice is not an alternative to punishment. So it can't be like, well, we can't criminalize these Black kids. We can't send them to prison. Let's use restorative justice. No, that is not holistic, and it's harmful. And restorative justice is not a simple program or blueprint. There are directions. There are concepts. There are ways of doing it, but it's not a one and done, right? You don't just sit in one restorative justice circle and everyone's healed and happy and everybody goes home. It's a process that takes time, right? So a kid, I working with a kid that keeps stealing from different adults around the office. We have restorative and transformative justice spaces for them, but they keep stealing because they're poor. So me criminalizing them for that actually doesn't solve the problem of them not having resources for them and their family. Me calling the police on them doesn't actually solve that. And then lastly, restorative justice is not a Western concept. White people did not create it. They appropriated it and stole it from its true intentions and meanings. And it's a way to be in community together. It's not a top-down hierarchical approach. So if a teacher can send a kid to the restorative justice room, a kid should be able to send a teacher to the restorative justice room. Even as I said, it shouldn't just be a room or a program. But it's not, restorative justice doesn't work when there is a vertical power, right? It only works when people are on an equal playing field. So I would argue that restorative justice can work between siblings, between friends who get in a fight. Restorative justice does not work when a police officer is sitting in the circle, which we see in MMSD a lot, unfortunately. Yes, okay. So restorative justice is centering and repairing healthy relationships, creating and repairing healthy relationships. So the relationship has to be there in the first place in order to repair it. If you don't have a healthy relationship with a young person, don't try to hold them accountable when they do something wrong, right? You need to create that relationship with them as a preventative measure. So then when you are approaching them, right, it's like, oh, Miss Bianca is coming to talk to me. I love her and trust her. And I know that she cares about me. I know that she's not coming to throw me in the SSI room or to call the police on me or call my mom or whatever. And restorative justice is also centering the needs of young people and being aware of power dynamics, right? We want to teach young people how to advocate for themselves. We want to build their power. and we want to build their self-determination. We cannot do that if we think that we're always in control and in charge. What decision-making power do young people have on over their lives, right? And we all, those of us who've studied early childhood education, as I don't know if this is a good example or not, but they say, oh, let your toddler have choices. Do you want an apple or do you want a banana? Do you want to wear this red shirt or do you want to wear this blue shirt? The same thing applies to teenagers. They need self-determination over their lives in order to be healthy adults and contributing members of our world. And a lot of times restorative justice focuses on like how to stop the violence, but when we talk about and how to make people safe, but our definitions of safety are all messed up in this country. Safety is physical safety, right? Nobody has the right to touch your body, but it's also emotional safety. Do young people feel emotionally safe in your care? Any questions about that? Okay. So often we get asked, what is transformative justice? And you'll talk about restorative justice, transformative justice. What is transformative justice? And transformative justice gets at the root cause of harm without relying on the state. So no police, no child welfare, no criminal justice system, none of that. And it questions if harm can truly be repaired in the context of systematic violence and oppression. Again, I gave the example of this young person stealing. Can we truly repair that if poverty still exists, right? So it says that we need to get rid of all of these systems of oppression in order to make people whole, make people feel like they have a place in this world and stop harm from happening. If we want to stop people from sexually assaulting people, then we actually need to end patriarchy. If we want to stop people from stealing, then we need to end capitalism, right? And those are much larger questions, much larger tactics and strategies that we have to employ, but it's important. So I identify more with the transformative movement than I do with restorative justice, but I still think restorative justice is incredibly important. Community control. So two other things that we're fighting for, and I'll be sure to put these links in the chat, is community control over schools. So Freedom Inc. wrote a community control policy because as we are getting rid of SROs, and as we are getting rid of punitive disciplinary policies, we still don't have, Black people still don't have power and self-determination. Again, it's always some old white man in a high tower telling us what we need to do. And just because they put a Black person in that position, it actually doesn't change the dynamic, right? It's always somebody else telling us what we need to do. When I'm not talking about one, I'm down for the school board members that we have. I'm happy that they were elected, but we're not fighting for individual representation of one Black person or 4 Black people on the school board when there are thousands of Black people in Madison. We're fighting for the community to have control and self-determination over schools. That includes curriculum, that includes safety, that includes our vision for what our schools should look like. One, we want to be able to hold adults accountable for continuing to harm young people, right? Via police, via suspensions, expulsions, all of that. And we want most impacted young people to have control over that. So Becky Sue with the straight A's and the parents who live in Maple Bluff, sorry, girl, you don't really get to have control. But Rayshawn with the straight F's and the just got out of JRC, we want you to have control over that because we know that if we can keep you safe, we know if you feel safe and welcome, we know that if you are, your grades are good for what it's worth, and we know that you are feel welcome in that space, then everybody else will too. And then it's really important that we have no excuse for people not to be able to attend. So we want people to be compensated for time, labor, childcare, transportation, interpreters, all of that. So I invite you to read more about our community control over schools, safety and accountability proposal that we proposed to MMSD, and share your feedback and share your thoughts and opinions and share it with your colleagues, because you all are experts. You all are experts too in what makes young people feel whole and safe. The other thing that we are currently, I actually saw some of your names on it from the email. So some of you have already signed it, but we launched our Black Sanctuary Pledge because we were getting a lot of calls from teachers and a lot of people who work within the school reaching out saying, yes, I support everything that Freedom Inc. is doing. I support police-free schools. I support young people having an opportunity to heal and be healthy and be whole, as opposed to people, speaking negatively on them and criminalizing them. But what can I do as an individual educator in my classroom, in my school, in my community? So we launched the Black Sanctuary Pledge a few weeks ago to give teachers and educators as a whole an opportunity to get involved with what we're currently doing and give some meaningful and tangible things that they can do or not do in their classroom to make students feel safe. Does someone want to read this?
As a future educator, I pledge to fight to make sure that the Madison Metropolitan School District is a sanctuary for all students. I pledge to not contribute to the criminalization of Black students by participating in the following. I, name of school, pledge to stand as an advocate and witness for students and parents threatened by any law enforcement agency, not to call police on children for disciplinary issues, which include school fights. I will seek out restorative justice practice or alternative measures. I will not take statements or interview from students about alleged misconducts without their parent or advocates present, not to call ICE on children, not to call Homeland Security on children, not to call the police on children with disabilities, not to sexualize or ridicule the bodies of girls and LGBTQ+ students.
Someone want to continue reading the second one?
I pledge to commit myself to ongoing training and political education, including the following: the impact of policing and the school to prison pipeline on Black youth and youth of color, queer and trans youth, and youth with disabilities, the history of policing in our public education system, anti-Black racism, supporting and responding to students with disabilities and behavior education plans, transformative justice facilitated by the Dane County Time Bank and/or the YWCA, de-escalation and conflict resolution, educating the whole child, trauma-informed practices and care, student-centered learning, cultural competency training, and decolonization school curriculum. To commit to a community-led accountability process if I cause harm to young people or their families.
Thank you. So a lot of folks are like, okay, what do we actually do? How can I do this? And this is how we're saying this is a start. to making sure that our schools are safe for Black and Brown children. And Freedom Inc. will be offering some of these trainings for people who sign the pledge, and we will, contact them, let them know when the trainings will be, and invite them to participate, right? So that they actually know. And I think, like, I don't know, we obviously don't have the best relationship with MMSD, but I think that when it comes to professional development, these are the things that we want people to be professionally developed around. These are the things that have been identified from our young people, right? They don't necessarily say we want to decolonize the school curriculum. They say we tired of learning about white history, and we're like, yeah, we need to decolonize the school curriculum.
Hey,
Right,
Bianca?
and yes.
So a lot of folks on this call are kind of working in the out of school time area. We, in many ways, think of ourselves as educators, but we're not necessarily teachers, or we're not in schools. Can we be signing this pledge too?
Yes, absolutely. We've had daycare workers sign, people who work at other community organizations with children sign. And all of these things are, like, I think that parents should sign and say, what is, trauma-informed practices in care? What is educating the whole child? What is, conflict resolution? What is the history of police, right? All of those things are important for all of us to know who have, interactions with young people. So I will, I'll type this in the chat in a few minutes. Oh, after I share my screen, so that you all can just click on the link. But I highly encourage anyone who works with young people to sign it. And I also think, one of the things that we talked about, Susan, on the prep call, I believe, was like, young people come to me in my after school program and tell me about what's happening in the school, and what do I do about that? How do I help advocate for them, in my after school program when school is over for the day. So we'll also be talking about some of that as well. Are there any questions about the Black Sanctuary Pledge and specifically? Oh, and I also want to shout out the Black Organizing Project in Oakland, California. They are the ones who established the Black Sanctuary Pledge years ago, actually. And they're part of our Police Free Schools national movement. So they supported a lot of our work in creating this. And they're, a Black woman-led organization. So I always want to give them credit. And yeah, so this is the Black Sanctuary Pledge is soon going to become a national thing that folks are doing around keeping kids safe in schools. And all of them are tailored to kind of some of the local needs of that district. Okay, I'll skip this part now. These were some of the frequently asked questions that that I mentioned before. And I'll just select a few to go through, and then I'll send the rest via email. One of the things that we see a lot of times, especially in Madison loves putting Black people in powerful positions, that oppressive positions, in my opinion, is, can cops just build better relationships with Black students and students of color? Shouldn't we just hire more Black cops or cops of color? And my response to that is always that you should not have to rely on a relationship with someone in order to avoid being harmed, right? You shouldn't have to rely on a relationship with a teacher in order to not be suspended. You shouldn't have to rely on a relationship with a police officer in order not to be killed. Like, it doesn't make sense. It's actually domestic terrorism is the UN definition for that. So, from the United Nations is saying, like, hey, that's stupid. So please, sorry, I shouldn't have said stupid, but that's silly. So please don't, use that as an argument. And I know that we recently hired a Black police chief and a Black sheriff, but representation has never equaled liberation, never, not one time in history has a representation or one Black person in a powerful position ever liberated Black people, ever stopped violence, right? So if we do a landscape across the country and look at all of the places where there are Black police chiefs, Black mayors, Black politicians, the statistics are still the same around criminalization, around incarceration, around poverty. So I don't want us to use that as an argument around why a Black police officer or a police officer of color is going to shift and somehow liberate Madison and criminalization, right? I think it's really important that we also know this is a strategy that white supremacy has been using since the beginning of of this nation, right? During the civil rights movement, they hired Black police officers who were not allowed to even look at white people, right? To beat Black protesters in order to say that their department is a racist because it's a Black cop doing it instead of a white cop. And also, statistically speaking, Black police officers are just as likely to shoot Black people as white police officers. It was just a national study that came out about that. And when we look at the murders of Freddie Gray, Korryn Gaines, both happened in Baltimore, the Baltimore area. There were Black police officers involved in both of those. So a Black police officer, a Black district attorney, a Black president does not stop anti-Black violence. We're not about individual representation. We're about community power and community control and community self-determination. Because all of us should have equal stake and equal power in that decision making, not just one individual Black person. Yes. So I'll stop sharing my screen that I can see you all again, and then we can spend the next few minutes answering questions. And I don't want people to be shy. I feel like, this is uncomfortable. Like, a lot of folks are uncomfortable discussing this, and I understand why. And I, I'm not always nice when I'm responding because I'm like, our kids are dying. So like Black people are dying, and it is difficult to process. Like, I just get up and go to work and do this every day, but these are also people that I love and care about, and it's my passion. But I will say that this is a safe space for people to push back, ask questions. Like, I came here for that, so I'm down for people to be like, well, what about this? Or this kid did this, so how should I handle it? And I will commit to giving critical and honest feedback, but hopefully, making you feel safe to ask questions.
I do. Actually, you already had the question up. I just wanted to know if you could answer it. What do you say when people say, why are you focusing on Black students instead of all students in the school? Especially when, of course, I'm sure your organization serves all students. Why do you specifically focus on Black students?
We specifically focus on Black students, especially when it comes to police violence in Madison, because when you look at the statistics, those are the students that are most impacted, right? Not that other students aren't impacted, not that other young people aren't in the JRC, but as of last year, 90% of youth who are in the juvenile jail are Black, right? So we need to give them the most attention, the most and the most support, right? Just like if we're focusing on poverty in Madison, is everybody needs resources. We're all struggling because of COVID, but 50% of Black children live in poverty in Madison. So we we need to give the resources to the folks that are most impacted and who are least likely to get the support and the resources that they need because of really anti-Black sentiments around who deserves dignity and who deserves respect. Nobody ever argues that white children don't deserve respect because they did something. But people actually make that argument for Black children. Well, they don't deserve respect because they were talking back, or they shouldn't have gotten a fight, or they were stealing cars. And I'm like, yeah, stealing cars is wrong. I just bought my car. It's my baby. It's my first car I ever purchased on my own. So of course I love it and want to keep it safe. But I'm like, my car is actually not more precious than a Black child's life, right? So I feel that's why it's just really important for me to focus on Black children. And our organization is actually Black and Southeast Asian. So we focus on Black students, Southeast Asian students, and students of color. But when we talk about the Police Free Schools campaign, our Southeast Asian folks, and MT is on the call. She is one of our Hmong youth coordinators. They take a step back because they're actually not the ones being impacted by police violence in the same way as Black students are.
I just had a quick question. You mentioned earlier that, you didn't really say these words, but these are kind of my words. You referenced to like, when in history has an oppressor ever done right by the oppressed? So with that said, how can we as a community of people work around the system or with the system, because the system isn't changing, the statistics aren't changing? We know a lot of this is policy, a lot of this is hiring. We shouldn't have to teach people these skills about compassion. They should come to the job with them already. And that comes with the issue with hiring and who we're hiring as teachers and educators. So how, with those barriers, and it's been one of my challenges, is like, because I work for the school district. So how are you navigating, and what strategies or suggestions do you have to navigate those systems, because they're only going to give so much, right? And you know this. So that's kind of my question and challenge to everybody in this group.
Yeah, I will tell you, first of all, I love what you said, like, you shouldn't have to train somebody to see somebody as a human being. Like, if I have to train you to see a Black child as a child, I kind of don't want you working with them. Also, I will be transparent about my own political struggles, as someone who's involved in the larger movement around what a system can ever give us, including a school, right? If the foundation of public education in America is literally anti-Black and anti-indigeneity, right? That is the foundation of schooling in America. So when we talk about what schools did to Black folks when they finally were able to go to school, when we talk about what schools did to Indigenous folks when they were finally able to go to school, if that is a foundation, I really struggle with if it can ever be repaired, or do we just need to start from scratch, right? So I don't have children yet, but my husband and I are planning on starting a family very soon. My mother-in-law is here, so we get that question on the hour, every hour. And I don't think that I would ever send my child to an American school, public school, because me and my husband both study education. And I'm like, no, I'm good. So I will tell you that's my own political struggle. I'm actually, a school abolitionist. I will tell you, I do not believe in American schools at all. I think that they need to be completely destroyed, right? And that doesn't mean, I'm not saying don't educate children. I'm not saying that. There needs to be a physical space where children go learn in groups. But the establishment of the American school, when it comes to curriculum, when it comes to ideology, when it comes to discipline, when it comes to interaction, when it comes to standards and expectations, I'm like, all of that just needs to go. We just need to start over from scratch. So I really struggle, even in giving this presentation, even when I'm talking to teachers about what they can do in their classroom, especially white teachers, I really struggle with the ability to ever do it in a way that would end oppression, because schools are still a part of the state. Schools are still a part of the system of white supremacy, even when they are trying not to be. Um, my thing is that in the meantime, in between time, until we reach this larger vision of abolition in a beautiful world where everyone is free and equal and supported and loved and safe, I'm like, I have to do something to end the suffering of Black students in school. And I have to at least try to talk to the people who care and who are engaged and who will show up, even when they make mistakes even when they make mistakes. And I have to try to push back against a system that I'm also trying to destroy at the same time. I'm want to make it safer for the students that are there, because the reality is Black parents are not going to pull out their students in mass because there's nowhere for them to go. And there's no resources for them outside of a school. Schools provide a lot of resources to Black students, even while being anti-Black as hell. So I think one of the things, and again, that's my own personal struggle. That's not even Freedom Inc.'s. I'm speaking as an individual, not as my organization. But so in the meantime, until we get to a place where we abolish schools, and do abolitionist teaching and all of that stuff. And I don't know how many of you have read Bettina Love's or saw her talk when she came to Madison. But until we get there, what do we do is the question that I struggle with. So even though schools are still going to be anti-Black, I'm like, the police are a huge problem. So we need to get them out. Even though teachers are still going to do anti-Black things, how about we actually give youth power to hold them accountable when they do things that harm them, right? Even though curriculum is still going to be problematic, how about we require Black history and Hmong history, Latinx history, all of those things, and make it an actual requirement as opposed to just some credit that a kid can choose to take or not take. In the meantime, what if we had youth advocates? What if we had restorative justice? What if we had counselors, and social workers and a culturally specific therapist, cultural healing programs for young people? I'm just listing off all of the things that Freedom Inc. has proposed to the district over the years. Because again, even though I have very little faith in any American system, including the police, including the child welfare services, including any state entity to ever do anything that is beneficial for us in mass, I have to do something in the meantime. And for me, that's fighting for power and control, right? Not Bianca Gomez having power, but young people and their families having power over the things that impact their lives. I don't know if that answered your question or if I was just talking.
No, that answered my question very well, and I appreciate you sharing your personal journey because that way I can reference it better. Also, I appreciate you recognizing Indigenous folks. I guess I come from the school of like race was a socially constructed thing. I did my roots. I'm Indigenous. I'm American. I'm from here. And a lot of us who are labeled Black are really Indigenous. We were here already. A lot of us did not come from Africa. So I do appreciate your organization looking at the lens of how, Indigenous folks have been treated as well in the struggle.
Yes, for sure.
I've really been inspired by thinking about how, again, do we as out of school time folks primarily try to bring transformative justice into our own work, recognizing that our systems too are kind of built on all the same stuff, right? We aren't schools, and probably for many of us, we chose not to be in schools because of all of those systematic oppressions, perhaps. And yet, you know, an a mainstream organization, I'm going to go with, or whatever we want to call it. Like, very few of us really are like grassroots, organized based organizations. So we have to train ourselves to engage youth voice, to really elevate and be about justice. So, you know, direct us. You know, what else should we keep learning? And, you know, I know I'm asking for too much, but like the first couple of steps or the next couple of steps, neighborhood centers or after school sites could take to say, hey, I want to do this within.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate that. So there was I need to find it. There was a study that I read when I was in grad school at UW about the after school programs, and I'm one that thinks that any space where Black people are could be incredibly anti-Black, even the home, right? So I'm not saying that after school programs are just like this miracle, but the difference in disciplinary rates, the difference in students feeling welcome, safe, loved, all of that are drastically different, in my opinion, than schools. Because in an after school program, students have some fun. I don't know. I don't know any other way to say it, but they have fun. They have free time. So when we talk about leadership, when we talk about wellness, and when we talk about creativity, which are our like big three solutions to all the problems that schools often lay out, it seems like after school programs provide youth to do that a little bit more, right? They get to hang out, they get to just talk to you instead of like you being like, do your work, like read this curriculum and do whatever. I'm sure all of you encourage their, you know, your youth to do your homework, to do their homework, but it's just a little bit more lax. And I'm like, that's actually how school should just be structured, right? Like you do your work, but it's more personable, it's more fun, you get to play outside. I'm like, I think it's ridiculous that they take away recess from kids so early. So I think when we talk about the differences between after school and programs and extracurricular programs in the typical school structure, y'all are kind of like halfway there because the kids actually enjoy it, right? You know, I pick up a lot of my youth from after school, and they're like, pick me up at 5 because I want to stay after school. You typically come at 4, but come at 5 today. So I think those are, you know, really positive things that you all provide kids a space to just be. And I think that's really important. Like the kids have a safe place to just be. And in Madison, they don't. They get criminalized at the parks because, you know, I work right by a park. So I'm always over there on Leopold and at Penn Park. There's always police. There's always some adults like yelling at young people, what are you doing? They can't go to the mall. Everything else costs money. So like, where are kids, where do young people have safe places to go just to hang out, just to exist with some adult supervision, some, you know, some safe adult supervision. So I think that's really important. I think having an analysis around anti-Blackness is the most important thing that you can do. Having an analysis around police violence and physical police, but also the policing state around how we treat Black children, how we don't just let them be, how we don't give them love is really the most important thing you can do. It was the most important thing that I did for myself because I was a teacher that was so, I love my Black students, but I was hard on them. I was like, no, you have to be great because society. And then I was like, you know, in my decolonizing process, I was like, I actually just need to let that go. Like, so what? Society is going to say this. That's not their damn problem. That's society's problem. So it took a lot of decolonizing for me to just let Black children exist. And of course, you know, when I hear them talking, you know, some other stuff, I intervene in healthy ways, but I do that through a political analysis. So I'll give an example. Like, I hate when my girls call each other bitches and hoes and all of that. And one, they push back and be like, well, Bianca, you say this and you say the N-word, and I'm like, oh shit, okay, I guess you're right about that. But more importantly, what stopped them from calling each other the B word was a feminist analysis about why we shouldn't call each other the B word. It wasn't me suspending them or kicking them out of the group for calling the other girl a nasty hoe or a slut or whatever. It was a feminist analysis, like, why do you think, like, where did that come from? Why do you think we call it, like, who taught us that? And why do we think we need to call it each other Black girls that? And we, watch videos and brought speakers in from the national Black queer feminist movement. And that is the thing that shifted them, right? Not even when it comes to, I'm trying to think of another thing that they do that always, well, we're at protests and then they just run off. And I'm like, oh my God, where are all my kids? Where are all my kids? Their parents are going to kill me. So me telling them they couldn't come to the protest is not what stopped them from, being out of sight. The thing that stopped them from being out of sight was safety training around why you need to stay safe, at how to stay safe at a protest and why you need to stay safe at a protest. So we brought in people from the Blackout Collective, which is a direct action training group located in Oakland, California. And they did a safety training with them. And they're like, oh, I didn't know that could happen to me. Wait, people are just getting snatched up, right? These people were shooting everywhere. So maybe I really do need to stay by Miss Bianca, right? That is what shifted their understanding about why they need to do what I tell them to do, not just for the sake of me telling them to do it, but for their own safety and wellness. So that's what I would encourage from and it takes time, right? They didn't stop saying the B word after a few weeks. It took, we've been together for 4 years. It probably took like a good year or two, right? Around like constant political education, feminist political education is what stopped that. So one, I think patience is really important, which y'all are working with kids, so I hope that you have some of it. And two, like explaining why they can't do something or why they shouldn't do something or why they should make a different decision, and using resources that are fun, that are engaging, that are, I'll give another example. This is, I really don't talk about this much because I don't want our youth being criminalized, but I have been seeing so many videos, not of my young people, but other young people on the internet playing with guns, which was very concerning. I'm like, first of all, how are you having access to this? But I didn't say, hey, I'm going to call your parents, I am going to call your parents, but I'm not going to kick you out of the group, or I'm not going to be mean to you. But we are about to do some gun safety stuff because y'all are tripping, right? We are going to bring in people to talk about why you should not be playing with guns, how they're unsafe, and all of the things that could happen, right? Same with we're a Black feminist organization, so we do a lot of work around reproductive justice, body safety, consent, sex education, right? I don't just say, hey, don't have sex to my teenagers. That's a waste of my breath and energy. But we are going to spend time talking about how to do it safely, how to protect your body, what resources are available. So I think that's the most tangible piece of advice that I could give is when you want to shift a young person's mind, when you want to teach them something, just simply telling them not to do it, or saying, hey, you got in a fight, or you were disrespectful, so you can no longer be in this space, is actually the most ineffective thing that you can do, because they actually didn't learn anything. They just learned. And I'm not saying that there shouldn't be consequences, obviously, when in accountability when harm happens, but in the long term, what are we doing to shift their thinking around it?
Yeah, yeah, thank you. So I see that we're at the 11:30 mark. We've lost a few people, but want to see if anyone else has any burning questions before we wrap up.
Is it okay if I ask one more? I don't know if you have the time. Um, and I'm not sure if it's the same way with other organizations, but when we talk about SEL, we talk about aligning and working with the school on social emotional learning. What part do you think we play also in doing that, along with combating systematic racism that is, just like I said previously, already I feel prevalent in the school? How do we combat it as well as work with the school on hopefully supporting these youth and moving forward in a social emotional learning?
Um, so I'm sorry, Howard, I don't know, I didn't understand your question. So you're saying like how can we like support the school in understanding social emotional learning and combating systematic injustice? Hello?
Howard, if you're talking, you went back on mute.
Sorry about that. Sorry. What was the clarification you needed?
Can you
That's
just repeat the question for me? I'm sorry.
And so when we talk about social and emotional learning, at least when it comes to our organization, we talk about it in aligning with the school on supporting youth in their social emotional learning. I think there's also like a second part in which I feel like we want to combat uh, the systematic racism that is already pre-existing in the school. So how do we come and combat the systematic racism as well as I guess support the individual student without the school feeling like, oh, I feel like you're disrupting what we're trying to do here, and the school maybe perhaps not allowing you to be a part of the school, or would you say that's just a part of that collaboration? Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Because well, I'll give you an example. I remember, and I talked to Susan about this, and it was just a blip in one of the workshops that we did, where they said, you know, if you're working with a student within the systematic racist structure of the school, when you do SEL, it can come off as I want to say like a racist pat on the back, as opposed to you really supporting the student in their social emotional learning. You're really not supporting them emotionally, but what you're really doing is just kind of patting them in the back and asking them to stay in line. But I feel like our job as an out of school time is to combat that thinking within the school, and as well as support the student. Hopefully, but does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah, yeah, I got you. So I think one like the reality is that there are a lot of teachers that are there that shouldn't be there. They get to stay because the requirements for being when I was going to school, and this wasn't that long ago, this was like maybe 8 years ago. When I was in school to be a teacher, I had to take one class on diversity. That's it. That was the only requirement. And then one class, I mean, I was a special education teacher, so I took a few more classes on social and emotional learning, even though it wasn't called that. But I think one of the things that a lot of folks have been pushing for within schools of education is more not just training, but preparation for educators who are going to work in all kids need social emotional learning, right? Let's not pretend like Black kids are just broken and inept, right? All students need and deserve that. I think the issue is that we already know how to do that when it comes to white kids. We don't even need to call it anything. We see their humanity essentially, and know that they are going through things and know they need additional support. Um, and so one, I think, and we hear from a lot of teachers that literally just don't know how. They would if they knew how to do restorative justice. They would if they knew how to provide those services and resources to to students. But the schools don't always provide those opportunities for that sort of professional development. And I think also we want professional development to just be like a quick little thing. And it does not work like that. It takes time. My professional development and the person that I am and the values that I have around working with young people took 10 years. And it's not, and I'm not saying that people just get to harm children along the way, but I think providing resources to teachers is as a preventative measure is really important. And also at the end of the day, the community needs to be able to hold people accountable for harming children. And I think that's what doesn't happen. We have to have a whole article written in Madison 365. We have to have a whole march, a whole campaign, a whole meeting with the police chief, a whole like all of that. Like we just need to be able to hold teachers accountable. And I don't think that every time a teacher does something they need to get fired, because that's not effective either. But yeah, I think that the issue is that the people who are most impacted and the people who have who do the deepest work with young people have no power in what the outcome is when a teacher does cause or an educator does cause harm. All of us have power over when the young people cause harm. We recognize that. We can suspend them, we can expel them, we can hurt their feelings, we can cuss them out, we can call the police. We actually have no power when a teacher does something, or when an educator does something, or when a security guard does something. So I think a solution to that would one be more opportunities, not for training, I hate the word training, but political and professional development. And then the teachers who don't want to get on board with that, they just need to go. They just need to go. I don't know if that means that they just quit or whatever, but the ways in which we're at a time where we're actually shifting how we are asked, how we are working with young people. We're at a time where we're trying to reestablish what education looks like, what hierarchies look like, what youth development looks like, right? We're in the middle of a no spanking movement, which I never thought would happen, right? We are saying like, actually do not put your hands on children, which is a wild political time to be in. So I think some people are just going to have to phase out of that. And then for the people who don't want to get on board, they're actually going to, this is just not the job for you anymore, because the requirements of what it means to be an educator and what it means to work with young people are shifting and are changing, and young people are demanding more. Their families are demanding more. Communities are demanding more. The world is demanding more. Also, teachers need to get paid more. I know y'all all agree with that. So one, providing professional and political development, ongoing professional and political development, and also like the community and the people who are impacted having power over what happens when, what you described, Mr. How, like when that's not taking place. You should actually get a say so in that process. Like, hey, I'm observing this. This teacher keeps doing this. Like, what can I do about it other than filing a complaint that's going to go through the district for 2 years? And I'm like, no, we need immediate results because young people are being harmed in the meantime. Sorry, I hope that somewhat answers your question. And I do have a meeting in a few minutes, so I have to wrap up. Susan, I will send you, I didn't get a chance to type it in the chat, But I'll send you some additional resources that we've developed. And I'll also, people can always reach out to me individually if they want more information, want to have a one-on-one, and or want to talk about some of the things that I discussed that they have more questions about.
Great. Are you willing to share your slides as well?
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. Okay,
Yeah.
great.